The radio crackled with static before the voice came through, sharp and irritated. "Command, this is Viper 2-1. We've got nothing on thermal, repeat nothing. These bastards vanished." The frustration was palpable, transmitted across miles of desert air. In the operations center at Bagram, a dozen faces stared at screens that showed only empty valleys and silent ridgelines. The convoy was out there somewhere, 12 souls in 3 vehicles, and they'd gone dark 47 minutes ago. No comms. No GPS ping. Just the Afghanistan mountains swallowing them whole like they'd swallowed so many others. "Viper 2-1, extend your search pattern north," the controller replied, but everyone in the room knew it was futile. F-16s burned fuel fast and the clock was always ticking. Someone muttered about sending the warthogs up, and another voice laughed darkly. "Yeah, send Graveyard. She'll probably crash into the mountains before she finds anything." A few scattered chuckles, quickly silenced by a hard look from the mission commander. But the damage was done. That name spoken with just enough venom to carry its history. 15 miles away, Captain Myra Graveyard Kasich sat in the cockpit of her A-10 Thunderbolt II, pre-flight checklist complete, waiting. The nickname had followed her for 3 years now, ever since that training accident that killed her instructor. Never mind that the investigation cleared her. Never mind that a mechanical failure had been documented, analyzed, filed away in some Pentagon basement. The name stuck because names like that always did, especially for women who flew planes designed to kill tanks. She was 32, with 800 combat hours and a reputation that somehow managed to be both invisible and infamous. People forgot her decorations but remembered her call sign. The aircraft around her was ugly and beautiful simultaneously. A titanium bathtub wrapped in metal, twin engines mounted high, and a nose cannon that could shred armor from a mile away. The A-10 was slow, ungainly, and absolutely perfect for what came next. When the call finally came through her headset, Myra's hand was already moving toward the throttle. "Graveyard, you're cleared for immediate launch. We have a situation." She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. The desert stretched before her, tan and endless, hiding secrets in its folds. The engines spooled up with that distinctive whine and she released brakes, feeling 11 tons of aircraft accelerate down the runway. Somewhere out there, 12 people were counting on someone to care enough to find them. She pulled back on the stick and the earth fell away. The hunt had begun. Flying low came naturally to Myra, like breathing or remembering trauma. The A-10 wasn't built for elegance at altitude. It was built to hug terrain, to dance with mountains, to become part of the landscape until the moment it revealed teeth. She kept her altitude at 800 feet, scanning the valleys through a combination of instruments and pure instinct developed over countless missions that never made it into official reports. The radio chatter continued behind her, Viper flight reporting negative contact again, their voices carrying that edge of defeat that came when fuel states got critical and hope started running on fumes. "Command, Graveyard is approaching last known position," Myra transmitted, her voice level and professional, giving nothing away. Below her, the terrain shifted from desert to foothills, then to something more treacherous, where valleys became canyons and shadows grew long even in midday sun. This was Taliban country, had been for 20 years, would probably be for 20 more. She knew their tactics, had studied them with the kind of obsessive focus that made other pilots uncomfortable. They didn't just ambush convoys. They erased them, dragged vehicles into caves or wadis, made them disappear so thoroughly that rescue became recovery, became just another statistic in the endless war. Her eyes caught something, just a flash of light where light shouldn't be. Sun on metal maybe, or glass. Could be nothing, could be everything. She banked left, dropping another 100 feet, the aircraft responding with the kind of sluggish grace that made fighter pilots laugh and ground troops worship. "Command, Graveyard has possible visual, 9 clicks north of the last ping. Investigating." There was a pause on the other end, probably someone checking whether to trust her, whether to commit resources based on her instinct. She didn't wait for permission. The A-10 came around in a wide arc, and she activated the targeting pod, bringing the thermal camera online. There, 3 vehicles in a narrow wadi, positioned defensively, surrounded by heat signatures that could only be human. But something was wrong. The positioning was too deliberate, too tactical. This wasn't a convoy in distress. This was a convoy that had been hunted, herded, pushed into a kill box. She counted signatures, 20-plus hostiles in elevated positions, and her blood went cold. They were waiting, watching, preparing to finish what they'd started. The convoy was still alive, but only barely, only because the Taliban wanted them alive for reasons that made her stomach turn. And Graveyard has confirmed visual on friendly forces, approximately 12 personnel, vehicles immobilized. I count over 20 hostiles in attack positions. They're pinned down and out of time. Her voice remained steady, but her hands were already moving, selecting weapons, calculating angles, running through the geometry of violence that her training had made automatic. The response came through clipped and urgent. Graveyard, Viper flight is bingo fuel returning to base. You're all they've got. Cleared hot on positively identified hostile targets. Rules of engagement, she cut through the transmission. Rowe understood, going in. And she pushed the stick forward, diving into hell with surgical precision. The first pass was reconnaissance masked as intimidation. The A-10's silhouette unmistakable as it roared over the wadi at 300 feet. Myra wanted them to see her, wanted them to know death had arrived wearing titanium skin and carrying a cannon that fired depleted uranium at 4,000 rounds per minute. She watched the thermal signatures scatter, seeking cover, and she marked their positions with the kind of cold calculation that came from understanding what happened to convoys when nobody came to save them. 3 years ago, she'd arrived too late to a similar scene. She still saw those faces sometimes, in the space between sleeping and waking. Friendlies, this is Graveyard on station. Stay down, stay together. I'm going to make some noise. She didn't wait for their response, already lining up her second pass. The hostiles were regrouping, and she could see them moving toward the vehicles again, emboldened by the fact that one slow aircraft couldn't be everywhere at once. They were wrong about that. The A-10 might not dance like an F-16, but it turned tight when it mattered, and Myra had learned to make the aircraft's limitations into weapons themselves. She came around south, into the sun, using the glare as cover, and then she was on them. The GAU-8 Avenger spoke first. That distinctive sound like tearing canvas magnified 1,000 times. A roar that shook the mountains and sent 30-millimeter rounds downrange with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. She walked the fire across a ridgeline where 6 signatures had clustered, watching through the targeting pod as stone exploded and bodies scattered. No celebration, no satisfaction, just the grim mathematics of survival. The hostiles on the far side opened fire, small arms tracers arcing up toward her, bright and futile against the armored bathtub that protected her. She noted their positions and banked hard right, coming around for another pass. Graveyard Command, Viper Flight is requesting your status. The question beneath the question was obvious. Could she handle this alone, or should they scramble more assets, burn more fuel, risk more lives? Myra's response came between bursts of cannon fire. Graveyard is engaged. Hostiles are numerous but disorganized. I can hold. What she didn't say was that the convoy couldn't wait for reinforcements, that every minute was borrowed time, that she'd already counted the rounds remaining and knew precisely how far she could stretch them. Mathematics and violence, the twin languages of close air support. The third pass targeted a pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed that had been repositioning to flank the convoy. She released a single Maverick missile, watching it track true, the explosion turning the vehicle into shrapnel and smoke. The thermal signatures around it didn't move again. Efficient. Necessary. She didn't let herself think about the human cost, not yet, not while people depended on her focus. That reckoning would come later, in quiet moments that arrived like unwanted visitors. The dance continued, passes blending together into a rhythm of violence and geometry. Myra operated in a state somewhere beyond conscious thought, where training and instinct merged into something that looked like art but was really just repeated trauma channeled into survival. The A-10 took hits. She felt them more than heard them. Small caliber rounds spanking against armor that laughed at anything less than anti-aircraft artillery. The aircraft was designed for this, built to absorb punishment and continue flying. And she loved it for that. Loved it the way soldiers loved their rifles and medics loved their aid bags. Graveyard, this is Anvil 2-6 on the ground. You're a goddamn angel. The voice was rough, shaking, belonging to someone who'd been certain they were going to die today. Myra recognized the call sign from the briefing, Sergeant Marcus Webb, convoy commander, 23 years old on his second deployment. Hang tight, Anvil. We're not done yet. She'd spotted 3 more heat signatures moving through a draw to the north, trying to circle behind the convoy's position. They moved with discipline, and that worried her. Trained fighters, not just local militia. She adjusted her approach, coming in from their flank, and hammered their position with cannon fire that turned stone to dust and ambition to corpses. The sky above was crystalline blue, indifferent to the violence below, and Myra found herself thinking about her instructor, Captain David Chen, who died when their A-10 shed a control surface at 8,000 feet during a training exercise 3 years ago. She'd managed to punch out at the last possible second. He hadn't. The investigation cleared her, mechanical failure, nothing she could have done. But investigations didn't matter in squadron-ready rooms where reputations were forged in whispers and sidelong glances. Chen had been beloved, a mentor to dozens of pilots, and she'd been the one in the cockpit when he died. The math was simple and brutal. Somebody had to carry that weight, and she was still alive to carry it. Graveyard, your Winchester on missiles. Command advises, she cut through the transmission. Negative, I still have cannon rounds and fuel, I'm staying on station. There was a pause, then a different voice, older, carrying authority. Graveyard, this is Overwatch Actual. We have a Apache inbound 20 minutes out. You've done outstanding work, but we need you to consider your fuel state. The translation was clear. Come home while you still can. Myra checked her instruments, did the math again. 20 minutes was too long. The hostiles were probing again, testing whether she was truly alone, whether they could overwhelm one stubborn aircraft through attrition. Overwatch, Graveyard will hold until relieved. Those people down there need someone who gives a damn. That's me. Graveyard out. The radio fell silent, and she smiled grimly. They thought she was being reckless, maybe suicidal. They didn't understand that she'd already died once, in a fireball over Texas scrubland, and everything since was borrowed time spent paying debts. The 4th pass nearly killed her. She came in low over the wadi, focused on a cluster of signatures that had regrouped behind a stone outcropping, and didn't see the RPG launch until it was already tracking toward her. Pure instinct saved her. She yanked the stick left and dumped flares, the aircraft protesting with groans that spoke of stress and metal fatigue. The rocket-propelled grenade missed by meters, close enough that she saw it pass through her peripheral vision, close enough that she felt the A-10 shudder in the pressure wave. Her heart hammered, but her hand stayed steady. Fear was acceptable. Panic was death. Graveyard, we saw that. You're advised to gain altitude. The controller's voice carried genuine concern now, the kind that came when someone competent might actually die on your watch. Myra ignored the advice, staying low where she could see the battlefield clearly, where the A-10's ugly grace made sense. She marked the RPG launch site and came around again, cannon rounds obliterating the position with prejudice. The thermal signature bloomed bright, then faded. One less threat. She was down to hundreds of rounds now, not thousands, and she began rationing her fire, making every burst count, becoming miserly with violence. Below, the convoy had formed a tighter defensive position. The Marines. She could see their positions clearly now through the targeting pod, using the vehicles as cover while they returned fire. They were holding, but barely, suppressed by superior numbers and position. Myra became their equalizer, their guardian angel wrapped in titanium and spite. Every time the hostiles tried to maneuver, she was there, cannon fire devastating their positions, forcing them to choose between pressing the attack and survival. Most chose survival. The ones who didn't became cautionary tales written in stone and blood. Graveyard Anvil 2-6, you just saved my corporal's life. He was exposed and you, the voice broke, momentarily overwhelmed. Myra cut through gently. Just doing my job, Anvil. Keep your people's heads down. This isn't over. But it was close to over, she could feel it. The hostile fire was slackening, the thermal signatures pulling back, melting into the mountains the way they always did when the cost got too high. They'd learned what every insurgent eventually learned. The A-10 might be ugly, slow, and outdated, but it was also relentless, and it would kill you with the patient efficiency of a machine built for exactly that purpose. Her fuel gauge demanded attention now, the needle dropping into ranges that made calculations urgent. She had maybe 15 minutes before she'd have to break station or risk not making it home. The Apache were still 10 minutes out. 5 minutes of vulnerability, 5 minutes when the convoy would be on their own. Myra made her decision with the same cold clarity she brought to everything else. She'd stay until the Apache arrived, consequences be damned. She'd already lived with one set of ghosts. She could handle more if necessary. The silence was almost worse than the fighting. For 3 minutes, nothing moved in the wadi except shadows and wind-blown dust. Myra circled overhead, eyes scanning for threats, knowing that insurgents were patient, that they understood American fuel limitations and timelines. They'd wait until she left, then move back in, finish what they'd started. It was predictable, tactical, and she refused to let it happen. Her thumb rested on the cannon trigger, ready, while her mind ran through contingencies and worst-case scenarios with the mechanical precision of someone who'd been trained to think 3 steps ahead of disaster. Graveyard Overwatch Actual. Apache flight is 8 minutes out. Your fuel state must be critical. The voice carried command. Wait now, not quite an order but close. Myra checked her gauges again. She had enough to make it home maybe if nothing went wrong, if she caught favorable winds, if the universe decided to grant her one small mercy. Overwatch Graveyard acknowledges, still holding station. The protest came immediately. Graveyard, that's not advisable. Those Apache can handle, she cut through. Sir, with respect, I'm the one who's been here for the last 30 minutes. I know the terrain, the enemy positions, the tactical situation. I'm staying until proper relief arrives. Silence stretched for 5 heartbeats. Then, understood, Graveyard, your dedication is noted, stay safe. Something in the tone had changed, a shift from irritation to something approaching respect. Myra didn't dwell on it. Respect was fine, but it didn't change her fuel state or alter the mathematics of flight. She made another pass, lower this time, deliberately provocative, daring the hostiles to reveal themselves. Nothing. They were waiting too, playing the same game of patience and fuel consumption. She could almost admire their discipline, if they hadn't been trying to murder 12 Americans an hour ago. Then she saw it, thermal signatures moving through a ravine to the east, 6 of them, trying to flank around to where they'd have clear shots at the convoy. Bold or desperate, she couldn't tell which. Myra banked hard, dropping until her altimeter screamed warnings about terrain clearance, and came in perpendicular to their movement. The cannon fired in 3 short bursts, precision work that required trusting the aircraft's stability and her own reflexes. The signatures scattered, 2 going still, the others finding whatever cover the ravine offered. She pulled up, banking away from the ridgeline, and checked her ammunition counter. 47 rounds remaining. Enough for maybe 2 more bursts, then she'd be flying an ugly glider with excellent armor. Anvil 2-6 Graveyard. You've got hostiles attempting to flank east. I've suppressed them, but stay alert. The response came back immediately, grateful and increasingly awed. Graveyard Anvil 2-6. I don't know how you're still here, but thank you. Seriously, thank you. Myra's response was automatic, deflecting. Thank me when you're back at base with a cold beer. But privately, quietly, she acknowledged something she rarely allowed herself. This felt right. This was why she'd joined, why she'd endured the whispers and the nickname and the sidelong glances. This moment, keeping people alive through skill and stubbornness and refusal to abandon them. This was enough. The Apache arrived like cavalry from an old movie, two AH-64s screaming over the ridgeline with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from overwhelming firepower and excellent training. Myra felt relief flood through her, physical and immediate, though she kept her voice professional on the radio. Apache Flight Graveyard, transferring tactical command. Hostiles are suppressed but still in the area, primary positions marked on your displays. The Apache lead's response was clipped and efficient. Graveyard Falcon 1-1. We've got the ball, you're cleared to RTB, hell of a job up here. She didn't leave immediately. Something made her circle one more time, watching as the Apache took station, their weapons systems coming online, the Hellfire missiles and chain guns representing a level of firepower that made her depleted look quaint by comparison. But the convoy was secure now, the Marines already beginning the process of recovering their vehicles, and her part in this particular story was finished. She turned west, toward Bagram, toward home, and felt exhaustion crash over her like a physical wave. Her hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline debt coming due, and her back ached from the sustained G-forces and tension. The flight back was smooth, carrying her faithfully despite the bullet holes she'd picked up. She counted at least 8 visible damage points during her post-combat checks, none critical, all within the aircraft's generous tolerances. The design was brilliant that way, built by people who understood that planes got shot and pilots needed to survive anyway. She radioed ahead, gave her fuel state and status, and received clearance for immediate landing. Standard procedure, nothing dramatic. But as she approached Bagram, she noticed something unusual. There were people on the flight line, not just the usual ground crew, but dozens of personnel, watching, waiting. The landing was textbook, smooth despite her fatigue, and as she taxied toward her revetment, the crowd came into focus. Pilots, crew chiefs, support staff, even a few officers who normally wouldn't bother with a single aircraft return. They were watching her, and some were clapping, a ragged applause that grew as she shut down the engines and began her post-flight checklist. Myra felt uncomfortable with the attention, uncertain what it meant. She'd just done her job, executed her training, stayed on station when leaving would have been easier. That was all. The crew chief who met her at the ladder was grinning, a young airman named Tors who usually maintained her aircraft with quiet efficiency. "Ma'am, you're a goddamn legend. The whole base has been listening to the radio traffic. What you did up there," Myra cut him off gently. "I just flew the plane, Tors. A-10 did the work." He shook his head, still grinning. "Ma'am, with respect, bullshit. You saved 12 lives today and everybody knows it." She climbed down, her legs unsteady, and looked at the crowd, at the faces that were seeing her differently now, seeing past the call sign and the rumors to something else. The debrief lasted 3 hours, intelligence officers and mission commanders asking detailed questions about enemy positions, tactics, weapons observed. Myra answered methodically, sketching diagrams and marking maps, translating violence into data that would feed into targeting packages and operational planning. Her responses were professional, devoid of emotion, the kind of clinical recitation that kept trauma at arm's length. They asked about her decision to stay on station despite fuel concerns, and she explained the tactical reasoning, the calculated risk, the assessment that the convoy couldn't wait. What she didn't mention was the feeling of those ghosts watching, Chen's voice in her memory asking whether she'd do everything possible, whether she'd be the pilot worth trusting. When they finally released her, the sun was setting, painting the Afghan sky in colors that seemed too beautiful for a place so saturated with violence. Myra walked toward her quarters, intending to shower and sleep for 12 hours, but a voice stopped her. "Captain Kasich." She turned to find Colonel Morrison, the wing commander, a man whose approval she'd never sought and never received. He was in his 50s, with the weathered look of someone who'd flown combat missions in 3 different wars. "Sir." She came to attention automatically, and he waved it off. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. They moved through the base in silence for a moment, Morrison choosing his words carefully. "I owe you an apology," he finally said. "When I approved your transfer to this squadron, I had reservations. The incident with Captain Chen, the talk around it, I let it influence my assessment of your capabilities. That was wrong." Myra kept her face neutral, though something twisted in her chest. "Sir, the investigation," he cut her off. "I know what the investigation said. I also know how squadrons work, how reputations get built on whispers and half-truths. You've been carrying that weight for 3 years, and I did nothing to stop it. Today, you reminded me why we pin wings on people's chests. Not because they're perfect, but because when everything goes to hell, they're exactly who you want in the cockpit." They stopped near the operations building, and Morrison turned to face her directly. "The call sign, Graveyard. I'm officially recommending we retire it. You've earned better." Myra felt something crack inside, some careful wall she'd built to protect herself from caring about their opinions. "Sir, with respect, I'll keep it." He raised an eyebrow. "Captain," she met his eyes, her voice steady. "It reminds me what's at stake. Every time someone says it, I remember why I'm here. Those 12 Marines went home alive today. That's what matters. The name is just noise." Morrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're a better officer than I gave you credit for. Dismissed, Captain. Get some rest. You've earned it." He walked away, and Myra stood alone in the Afghan twilight, feeling lighter somehow, as though something heavy had been set down after years of carrying it. The nickname would stay, but its meaning had changed. Not a mark of shame, but a reminder of purpose, of the ghosts that demanded she be better, do better, stay better. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams that replayed the mission with the clarity of combat memory. She saw the thermal signatures scattering, heard the cannons roar, felt the aircraft shudder under incoming fire. But mixed with those images were older ones. Chen's face before the ejection, the ground rushing up through the canopy, the investigation room where men in suits had asked the same questions 40 different ways, looking for culpability, for mistakes, for someone to blame. She woke at 400, gave up on sleep, and headed to the gym, working through the tension with mindless repetition until her muscles burned and her mind quieted. The squadron briefing at 800 was different. Usually she sat in back, participated when required, and otherwise remained invisible. Today, people made space for her near the front, nodded greetings, treated her as though she belonged. Major Hendricks, the operations officer, opened with mission updates and then deviated from the standard format. "Before we proceed, I want to acknowledge Captain Kasich's actions yesterday. She demonstrated exceptional airmanship and combat effectiveness, maintaining station for 40 minutes against significant opposition and saving 12 lives. That's the standard we aspire to in this squadron." Scattered applause, more genuine than obligatory. Myra kept her face neutral, uncomfortable with praise, preferring the invisibility she'd cultivated. After the briefing, pilots approached her, some she'd flown with for months without exchanging more than necessary words. They asked about the mission, about flying the A-10 in close terrain, about her decision-making process. She answered their questions honestly, turning the conversation toward tactics and training, deflecting from anything that felt like hero worship. Captain Rodriguez, an F-16 pilot she'd always found arrogant, surprised her. "I used to think the Warthog was obsolete, just a target waiting for someone with a SAM system. Watching your mission changed my mind. That was art, Kasich." She met his eyes. "It was mathematics and training, nothing more." But it was something more, and she knew it even if she couldn't articulate it properly. Flying close air support wasn't about speed or altitude or technological sophistication. It was about presence, persistence, the willingness to stay when leaving made sense, to risk everything for people you'd never meet who'd probably never know your name. The A-10 embodied that philosophy, ugly, slow, vulnerable by modern standards, but built around a cannon and a pilot who gave a damn. She'd chosen this aircraft deliberately 3 years ago, after Chen's death, seeking something that demanded her full attention, that wouldn't forgive inattention or half measures. That afternoon she walked the flight line, inspecting her aircraft with tours. The bullet holes had been patched, systems checked, fuel tanks topped. The A-10 sat there looking exactly like what it was, a flying gun with an attitude problem. Torres pointed out the damage, showed her where rounds had punched through non-critical areas, explained the repairs. "She brought you home, ma'am. That's what matters." Myra ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the rivets and repairs. "Yeah, she did." The convoy returned to Bagram 3 days later, their vehicles battered but operational, their personnel exhausted but alive. Sergeant Webb found her in the chow hall, approached with the careful formality of someone meeting a person whose voice they knew but whose face they'd never seen. "Captain Kasich, I'm Webb, Anvil 26. She looked up from her meal, nodded. "Sergeant, good to see you walking around." He sat down without asking, and she didn't object. "I wanted to thank you. What you did up there, we were done. We'd accepted it. Then we heard your aircraft and everything changed." She didn't know how to respond to that kind of raw gratitude, so she deflected. "You held position, maintained discipline, made my job easier." Webb shook his head. "Ma'am, with respect, don't do that. Don't minimize what happened. You stayed when you could have left. You fought for us when you were alone and low on everything. That matters. That matters more than you probably realize." His voice carried intensity that made her uncomfortable, the weight of someone who'd faced death and come back changed. "My Marines, they want to meet you, all of them. You're the reason they're going home, please." She almost refused, preferring anonymity, but something in Webb's face stopped her. This mattered to them, and denying them felt cruel, even if attention made her skin crawl. "Okay, where?" He brightened immediately. "We're at the transient quarters, building 7, any time that works for you." She checked her watch. "Give me an hour." He stood, came to attention, and she waved him down. "We're both too tired for that. See you in an hour, Sergeant." The meeting was awkward and moving simultaneously. 12 Marines, young mostly, with the weathered look that came from patrols and ambushes and close calls. They stood when she entered, a discipline she didn't require but couldn't dismiss. Webb made introductions, and she learned their names, their hometowns, tiny details that made them human rather than thermal signatures on a targeting display. Corporal Jenkins, who Webb had mentioned on the radio, shook her hand with both of his. "You saved my life, ma'am. I was exposed, pinned, and your cannon run gave me time to reach cover. I've got a daughter who's 3. I'm going to see her because of you." The weight of that statement settled on her shoulders, another ghost but a different kind, one that demanded she live up to the person they saw rather than the person she knew herself to be. They asked questions about the A-10, about flying combat missions, about how she'd learned to stay so calm under fire. She answered honestly, explaining training and procedure, but Jenkins interrupted. "Ma'am, that's not what I'm asking. How do you handle knowing people's lives depend on your decisions?" She was quiet for a moment, choosing words carefully. "You remember that you're not special. You're just the person in position to help, so you do. The alternative is unacceptable." The weeks that followed brought subtle changes to squadron dynamics. Pilots sought her input on close air support tactics, asked her to review their mission planning, included her in discussions that had previously happened without her presence. The nickname remained, but its usage changed. Less mockery, more acknowledgement, a call sign that now carried weight and history. She still heard whispers sometimes, still caught sidelong glances, but they were different now, tinged with respect rather than doubt. The ghosts remained, Chen's memory still sharp, but they felt less like accusations and more like reminders of why precision mattered, why training mattered, why staying in the fight mattered. She flew 42 more missions that deployment, each one executed with the same methodical care that had saved Webb's convoy. Some were routine patrols where nothing happened. Others tested her limits, pushed her aircraft to its tolerances, required her to make split-second decisions with lives hanging in the balance. She brought everyone home, earned a reputation for being exactly where she needed to be, when she needed to be there. Other pilots started requesting her for complex missions, trusting her judgment, her skill, her willingness to stay until the job was finished. Colonel Morrison called her to his office 6 weeks before their scheduled rotation home. She reported expecting another mission briefing, but instead found him holding a folder with her name on it. "Captain, I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. Your actions on that day in July demonstrated extraordinary heroism and superior airmanship. The convoy personnel have also submitted statements supporting the recommendation. She started to protest, to explain that she'd just done her job, but he held up a hand. I know what you're going to say. You were just following training, executing procedure, nothing special. But here's the thing, Captain. Exceptional isn't about doing something impossible. It's about doing the necessary thing when it's difficult, dangerous, and nobody would blame you for walking away. The medal came through 3 months later, after they'd rotated back to the States, after she'd resumed the routine of training flights and peacetime operations that felt simultaneously safer and emptier. The ceremony was small, squadron level, with Morrison pinning the medal on her dress uniform while her fellow pilots watched. He read the citation, words about valor and dedication that felt disconnected from her memory of that day, which was mostly fear and fuel calculations, and the desperate need to not let anyone down. But Webb was there, had flown commercial on his own dime to attend, and when he saluted her afterward, his eyes carried something she recognized. The understanding that they were both carrying weight now, different kinds but equally heavy. The medal went in a drawer, a piece of metal that represented one day out of thousands, one decision out of millions. She didn't display it, didn't talk about it, preferred to let it rest with all the other things she carried quietly. But sometimes, late at night when sleep proved elusive, she'd take it out and remember that day. The blue sky, the desperate voices, the thermal signatures scattering under her guns. She'd remember staying when leaving made sense, fighting when the odds looked bad, choosing to care when indifference would have been easier. The story spread beyond the squadron, the way stories do when they carry emotional weight. Aviation magazines requested interviews. She declined them all. Documentary producers wanted to tell her story. She referred them to public affairs and ignored follow-ups. She had no interest in becoming a symbol or a talking point in debates about women in combat, about aging aircraft, about the value of close air support in modern warfare. She just wanted to fly, to do the job she'd trained for, to live up to the standard Chen had demonstrated before that training flight went wrong. But anonymity was harder to maintain now. She gave a lecture at the Air Force Academy, explaining close air support tactics to cadets who looked impossibly young and eager. She tried to focus on procedure and training, but they wanted to hear about that day in July, about the decision to stay, about flying alone against superior numbers. One cadet asked the question she'd been avoiding. "Ma'am, were you scared?" The room fell silent, everyone waiting for the heroic answer, the denial of fear that would fit the narrative they wanted. She disappointed them. Terrified, the entire time, fear is acceptable, fear is human. The question isn't whether you're scared, it's whether you let fear make your decisions. Another cadet female raised her hand hesitantly. "Ma'am, how do you deal with the nickname, Graveyard? That seems," she trailed off, uncertain how to finish. Myra understood the question beneath the question. How do you survive when they try to define you by your worst day? You carry it. You let it remind you what's at stake. You refuse to let other people's judgments determine your worth. And you fly better than anyone expects, not to prove them wrong, but because people's lives depend on you being good at your job. The room was quiet, cadets processing words that didn't match the usual military mythology about confidence and fearlessness. After the lecture, the female cadet approached, introduced herself as Cadet Thompson. "Ma'am, I want to fly A-10s. Everyone says they're being retired, that I should focus on F-35s or something modern. But after hearing you talk," Myra studied her, seeing earnestness and determination that reminded her of a younger version of herself. "The A-10 might be old, but it does a job that needs doing. It saves lives when lives need saving. If that matters to you, if that's why you want to fly, then don't let anyone talk you out of it. The equipment matters less than the person flying it." That conversation stayed with her, made her realize that she'd become something she'd never intended, a reference point for others trying to navigate the same difficult spaces she'd occupied. It was uncomfortable, carrying that weight, being seen as someone who'd figured things out when she mostly felt like she was improvising, making it up as she went along. But maybe that was the point. Nobody had it figured out. Everyone was just doing their best with limited information and high stakes, and the difference between success and failure often came down to willingness to try when the odds looked bad. 2 years after that day in July, she was promoted to major and given a training command position, teaching new A-10 pilots the intricacies of close air support. The assignment felt right, allowing her to pass along knowledge earned through hundreds of combat hours and difficult lessons. Her students were eager, skilled, and terrified of disappointing her, which she found amusing. She wasn't demanding perfection. She was demanding commitment, attention, the kind of focus that kept people alive when everything went wrong. Some students thrived under her instruction. Others washed out, unable to handle the pressure or the precision required. She felt no guilt about the washouts. Better they discover their limits in training than in combat where failures killed people. The A-10 community was small, tight-knit, and everyone knew everyone's reputation. Myra found herself becoming an elder stateswoman despite being only 37, sought out for advice on careers and tactics, and how to handle the inevitable moment when everything went to hell, and you had to make decisions that would haunt you regardless of outcome. She gave what guidance she could, usually some variation of trust your training, trust your instinct, and accept that perfection is impossible, so just aim for good enough to bring everyone home. Chen's ghost was quieter now, less accusation and more companion, a reminder of standards worth maintaining. She'd given a speech at a memorial service on the 5th anniversary of his death, talked about his skill and dedication, and the way he'd pushed his students to be better than they thought possible. Afterward, his widow had approached, hugged her tightly, whispered, "Thank you for remembering him well." That moment had done more to heal the wound than any investigation or medal could accomplish. The recognition that she'd honored his memory through her flying, through her teaching, through her refusal to let fear or failure define her. The base psychologist tried once to talk to her about trauma, about processing combat experience, about healthy coping mechanisms. Myra had listened politely and declined follow-up appointments. She wasn't in denial about the weight she carried. She'd simply accepted it as the price of doing a job that mattered. The nightmares had faded, replaced by dreams that were mostly ordinary, and when the bad ones came, she woke up, went to the gym, and worked through them with physical exhaustion. It wasn't therapy, but it was functional, and functional was good enough. She took students on their first combat deployments, watched them experience the chaotic reality of war, guided them through their first missions where violence stopped being theoretical and became immediate. Some handled it well. Others struggled, needing time and space to process what they'd seen and done. She gave them what Chen had given her: high standards, honest feedback, and the understanding that being scared was okay as long as you still did the job. One student, Captain Alvarez, asked her after a difficult mission, "Does it get easier?" She'd considered lying, offering comfort, but chose honesty instead. "No, you get better at carrying it. That's different from easier." The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, forwarded through official channels, postmarked from Iowa. Myra opened it during lunch, expecting routine correspondence, and found instead a handwritten note from a woman named Elizabeth Jenkins. "Dear Major Kasich, you don't know me, but you saved my father's life in Afghanistan in July 2023. He's Corporal James Jenkins. He talks about you sometimes, about the day you stayed when you could have left. I'm writing because I'm 7 now, and my dad says when I'm old enough to understand, I should thank you for making sure he came home. So thank you. I have a dad because of you. That matters." The note was decorated with crayon drawings of airplanes, some identifiable as A-10s despite childish proportions. Myra sat with that letter for a long time, reading it multiple times, feeling emotions she usually kept compartmentalized. This was the point, the reason all of it mattered, not medals or promotions or reputations, but the simple fact that people got to go home, got to see their families, got to have futures because someone stayed in the fight. She wrote a response, kept it simple, thanked Elizabeth for the letter and told her that her father was brave, that he'd held his position under fire, that saving him had been an honor. She didn't mention fear or fuel states or the mathematics of violence. Some things didn't need sharing with a 7-year-old. That deployment, Webb's convoy, had become touchstone in her memory, the moment when everything changed, when her reputation transformed from liability to asset, when she stopped being Graveyard the Cursed and became Graveyard the Reliable. But the deeper truth was simpler. She was the same person before and after, same skills, same dedication. What changed was visibility, the accident of circumstance that put her actions in spotlight bright enough that people had to acknowledge them. Thousands of pilots flew good missions that nobody heard about. She'd been lucky enough to fly hers when people were watching. The A-10 community held a reunion in Las Vegas that year, retired pilots and current operators gathering to share stories and maintain bonds forged in combat and training. Myra attended reluctantly, uncomfortable with large social gatherings, but found unexpected value in conversations with pilots who'd flown the aircraft in Desert Storm, in Bosnia, in Iraq. They shared tactics, argued about weapons employment, told stories that ranged from hilarious to heartbreaking. An older pilot, Colonel Reeves, retired now but legendary in his time, sought her out specifically. "I've heard about you, Cassich. The convoy mission. That was textbook flying in impossible conditions. Chen would have been proud." The mention of Chen's name in that context, connected to pride rather than tragedy, hit her unexpectedly hard. She managed to keep her composure, thanked him, and excused herself to the balcony where Las Vegas sprawled beneath artificial lights that turned night into day. Reeves followed, gave her space but didn't leave. "I knew David Chen, flew with him in Iraq. He was exceptional and his death was a waste, but it wasn't your fault. You know that intellectually, but do you know it here?" He tapped his chest. She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm working on it. Every mission, every student who graduates, every person who comes home, that helps." The Air Force announced the A-10's retirement, again, to take effect in 5 years. Myra had heard similar announcements before, watched as budget realities and political pressure delayed the inevitable. The aircraft was old, difficult to maintain, lacked the sophisticated technology of modern platforms. But it also did a job that needed doing, and nobody had designed a replacement that could loiter for hours, absorb punishment, and put rounds on target with the same precision. The announcement generated the usual debates, Congress pushing back, operators arguing for reprieve, planners insisting on modernization. Myra stayed out of the politics, focused on training the pilots who'd fly the aircraft for whatever time remained. Her students asked what they should do, whether they should transfer to other platforms, position themselves for careers beyond the A-10. She gave pragmatic advice. Become excellent at close air support, develop skills that translated across platforms, understand that missions mattered more than equipment. But privately, she hoped the retirement would be delayed again, that the aircraft would survive another budget cycle, that future pilots would have the opportunity to fly something that prioritized functionality over sophistication. The A-10 wasn't sexy or modern, but it saved lives, and that counted for something in her arithmetic. She was offered a staff position, a job at the Pentagon that would position her for advancement, for rank, for influence. She turned it down, preferring to stay operational to keep flying and teaching. The decision probably capped her career. Staff time was necessary for promotion beyond major, but she'd made peace with that calculus. She'd rather spend her remaining years flying the aircraft she loved than pushing papers in Washington, attending meetings where the cost of war was discussed in abstracts rather than understood through experience. Her commander was disappointed but understanding. "You're too good to waste on staff work anyway. Stay as long as you want." At 39, she was old by fighter pilot standards, young by human ones, existing in a strange space where her body still performed but knew its limits. where experience compensated for reflexes that had marginally slowed. She flew with students half her age, pilots who'd grown up with technology she'd learned to use mid-career, and found ways to remain relevant, to contribute knowledge earned through missions they'd study in textbooks. Some students were condescending until they flew with her, until they saw her read terrain and threats with the kind of intuition that looked like magic, but was really just pattern recognition built through repetition. The sky remained her refuge, the place where everything made sense, where rules were clear and outcomes measurable. At altitude, she could leave behind the weight of reputation, expectation, memory, and just exist as pilot and aircraft, making decisions based on physics and tactics rather than politics and perception. She flew solo when schedules allowed, practicing maneuvers, testing limits, maintaining the kind of proficiency that required constant attention. The A-10 forgave some mistakes but punished complacency, and she refused to become the pilot who assumed competence rather than proving it. Webb showed up at the base unannounced one autumn morning, older now, out of the Marines, working construction in Nebraska. He found her in the squadron building, interrupted a briefing to ask if she had time to talk. She excused herself, curious and concerned, and they walked the flight lane together. "I got married last month," he said. "Elizabeth was the flower girl. I wanted to invite you, but I didn't have current contact info." She smiled, genuinely pleased. "Congratulations, I hope you're happy." He nodded, then stopped walking, turned to face her. "I am, because of you. That day, I think about it still, probably too much. My wife knows the story. Elizabeth knows a version of it. They both wanted me to ask you something." Myra waited, uncertain where this was going. Webb pulled out his phone, showed her a picture of a little girl, 7 years old now, with bright eyes and her father's smile. "She wants to meet you. She has questions about flying, about being brave, honestly, I think she just wants to meet the person from the story. Would you consider it?" The request made Myra uncomfortable. The idea of being someone's hero, someone's example, carrying weight she wasn't sure she could support. But Elizabeth's crayon drawings were still on her desk, and the mathematics of debt suggested that sometimes you owed people more than comfort. "Okay, when?" The relief on Webb's face was immediate. "Really? Thank you. Any time that works for you. We're 3 hours away, we can drive down." They arranged it for the following weekend, a Saturday when Myra had no obligations, no flights scheduled. She spent the week feeling nervous, unusual for someone who'd faced anti-aircraft fire without flinching, but combat was familiar terrain. Meeting a child who saw you as something more than human was terrifying in different ways. Elizabeth arrived wearing a homemade pilot costume, complete with toy wings and a carefully colored name tag that read Captain Elizabeth. She approached Myra with a mixture of shyness and determination, held out her hand formally. "Major Cassage, thank you for saving my dad." The formality cracked something in Myra's chest, this child trying so hard to be grown-up, to be appropriate. She shook the offered hand seriously. "You're welcome, Captain Elizabeth. Those are impressive wings. Did you make them yourself?" That opened the floodgates, Elizabeth launching into excited explanation about school projects and books about aviation, and how she wanted to fly jets when she grew up, maybe A-10s if they still existed. They spent 3 hours together, Myra showing Elizabeth the squadron spaces, the aircraft on the flight line, explaining controls and weapon systems in age-appropriate terms. Elizabeth absorbed everything with the kind of focused intensity that reminded Myra of herself decades ago, asking smart questions, making connections between things Myra had explained separately. Webb watched from a distance, his expression carrying gratitude and